Welcome everybody to this video presentation of mine, The Rights of the Jewish State of Israel According to International Law. There's a principle, it's called the principle of possidetus juris, which is probably the best argument for the existence of Israel and gives credence and proof that Israel really has every right to that land. And I would like encourage you to listen through this video and see what you think. Now, this was the British Mandate of Palestine. It started in 1918 after the First World War. Britain and France defeated the Ottoman Turks in the Middle East. And so the Ottoman Turks were allied with Germany. And the Ottoman Empire lasted, it was from about the 1500s in this whole area and till 1917 when they lost in this war. And so Britain took over this area and it became the British Mandate of Palestine. It meant that the British government would hold the government there until such a time as these new states were formed. His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will cease to be responsible for administration of Palestine from midnight on the 14th of May 1948. So this is when they withdraw from the mandate, and up to that point for 30 years they operated. The ending of 30 years of British rule in Palestine begun when General Allenby's troops occupied the country towards the close of the First World War, provides a fitting occasion for a brief review of its history and the policy pursued by His Majesty's government. So this is a key element here. On May 15th, 1948, the UK withdrew from Palestine. It had been given a mandate over the territories after it defeated the Ottomans in World War I. The evening before, though, David Ben-Gurion, president of the Jewish Agency for Palestine, declared Israel's statehood and independence. Now, this is very important because the Declaration of Independence came while the British Mandate was still in effect. According to a principle called juris possidetus juris, the borders of the predecessor becomes the borders of the emergent state. Here, I'll say it again. The borders of the predecessor becomes the border of the emerging state. So let's take Jordan, for example. In 1946, they declared themselves an independent state. And they were given this area of the British Mandate. You know, it was this part of it. And so, you know, at that point, this became its borders. And it was the borders of the previous British Mandate, east of the Jordan River. Because they had promised the British in the Balfour Declaration that they would start a Palestinian, or actually a Jewish state in West Palestine. And so that was what they were waiting for. That's why they didn't give the whole area to Jordan. Now, in international law, there's a principle of international law referred to as ut possidetus juris, literally translated to as you possess, a Roman legal doctrine first cited in private municipal law. Ut possidetus juris maintains that when new countries are created, where there was no separate country previously, the borders of the new country are identical to the borders of the last top-level geopolitical entity in that territory. Professor Kontorovich illustrated this concept with the example of Crimea, which the international community regards as currently occupied by Russia, but truly part of Ukraine. The reason for this international consensus is that Ukraine declared independence upon the dissolution of the USSR And they did that in 1991. The last top geopolitical entity in the territory, thus taking on the boundaries that included within it the newly constituted independent Ukraine. In other words, what Ukraine had before, they got again. They didn't lose territory by becoming independent. So international law applies to the state of Israel as well in 1948. In 1948, Israel declared its independence, meaning that by the acceptance of legal principle of possidetus, juris, the new state inherited the same borders as mandatory Palestine, which came before it, specifically the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, the very thing that the Palestinians are claiming, from the river to the sea. It is important to note that Palestine did not declare statehood when Israel did in 1948. Instead, they willingly handed their fate to invading armies of a combined Arab force drawn from neighboring states. If the Palestinians had declared independence, then the two forces would have fought for the power to govern the new state with borders set by the mandate, the British mandate. However, that legal fight for governance never materialized. Therefore, when we apply the rule of international law that is used to determine the borders of all new countries, Israel must be recognized as the only successor entity to the mandate. What about the UN partition plan? Now, let us turn to the legal weight of the UN partition plan. After the British plan to evacuate the territory that would become the state of Israel when Britain decides to withdraw its mandate, before that even happened, becomes clear. It seems that Israel's neighboring Arab countries would, as they boasted, wipe out the Jews upon Israel's independence declaration. As a result, the United Nations created a special committee on Palestine and sent in authorities to author a report to avoid bloodshed and instead maintain peace in the region. The UN scope recommended a plan to partition the territory into a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem becoming a trusteeship of the British. Great plan. This plan, however, was not legally binding for two reasons. First, it was denied by the British. They said, we're done with this area. We are free from it. We're going to shut it down. We're going to withdraw from this mandate. And they did that. The day before they did that, though, Israel declared themselves a state. And the second, being that the UN does not possess the power to legislate. They're not like a government. They are an organization after the war to keep peace. They're an organization, but they can't legislate law. So what about Israel's taking back the land in 1967? In 1967, months of escalating tension along its borders and deployment of large concentrations of opposing forces under a United Arab Command culminated in closing off the only waterway leading to Israel's southern port of Eilat. This act of war triggered Israel's preemptive attack, leading to the retaking of Gaza Strip from Egypt and Judea and Samaria from Jordan in a 6-day war. In doing so, Israel was reconstituting the territory over which they had already had sovereignty. Possidetus juris, you see. They already had that territory because they inherited it from the predecessor, which was the British mandate of that land. It wasn't half of it, it wasn't a quarter of it, it was according to the borders of that mandate. And it didn't include Jordan, because Jordan was a separate state. So how about the argument that Israel violated the Geneva Convention, that they in fact are with these settlements? And you know, they're classified as what do you call them? You know, these are illegal settlements because they're on Arab land, and this is just not true. And here's the reason. Many make the argument that Israeli settlements violate the Geneva Convention. The convention concerns the treatment of civilians in occupied territories. Let's look at that. During wartime. So what they're saying is that Jordan, Judea and Samaria is occupied territory. Okay. Critics of Israel point to Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, which protects against ethnic cleansing. That's what South Africa is claiming is happening in Gaza, as the basis for their argument. Article 49 states the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population. This clause forbids the occupying power. Look at that now again. From acting. Individual civilians acting of its own volition, like individual Jews, could not violate this article. Further, the clause does not say a power should keep its civilians from entering a territory. Thus, to violate this clause, the so-called occupying power, which according to uti possidetus juris, has already established Israel not to be. Israel isn't the occupying power. Jordan is. And Egypt was. They came in. They have sovereign territories. They've invaded and tried to take this area. And they did. And they're setting it up for a Palestinian state. Would have to act upon people to cause their mass movement out of the area, which they didn't. Moreover, the phrase part of its own civilian population suggests sizable demographic groups, not individuals. Thus, a large number of people would have to be transferred or deported to violate this article. The West Bank witnesses small amounts of immigrants, that's people going out, not exoduses. And so this is not a violation. For one thing, they are not the occupying power. It's their land, which they inherited from the British Mandate, just like Jordan did. You know, as soon as Jordan declared independence, that land became no longer part of the British Mandate. And so they had the borders of it. And that's the same what happened to Israel. But the Arabs decide, well, they're not going to let that happen. So they invaded. And they took those lands, and they were the occupying power on the lands which wasn't really theirs. And so when Israel took it back and has begun to administrate those areas, well, then they're calling Israel as the occupying power, but it's already their land. The land which they had from the very beginning in 1948 when they claimed it according to this principle. So what about Jordan's claim to the West Bank and East Jerusalem? Many argue Israel lost its claim to the East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, in the 1948 War of Independence, in which Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip and Transjordan captured East Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. As a result, though, of uti possidetus juris, however, these are simply military occupations. These are occupying powers. Egypt and Jordan held no legal claim to these territories, and neither did the Palestinians, because they never declared a state, you see. And so this is what's happened. And unfortunately, Israel has come to the benefit of that, just like Syria when it declared itself a state, and Iraq and Jordan and Lebanon. Nobody complained about that. And it wasn't their land before. It was owned by the British and French which they took from the Ottoman Turks before that. So it never was their land. So why the UN partition plan is flawed at the outset? Well, like we said, here's the mandates. Here's Jordan and 1946, and here's Israel 1948. And so this was the British mandate. And so whatever the borders, when you declare independence, those are your borders. Isn't that interesting? But here's the borders that the UN partition plan is trying to implement. They're trying to make this into a two-state solution. And it's not going to work because they're violating international law. Uri, possidetus, juris. You know, the right of the newly formed state to the borders of its predecessor. And here they are, like I showed you. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it keeps you informed on what's going on. And God bless.